Happy Lunar New Year, noobs! This video is for all the Asian Americans out there. Let's talk about the bamboo ceiling. America clearly has a racism problem, but with Asians, it's a little bit more nuanced, almost subconscious. If you're an Asian American, half the battle in breaking through is realizing that these preconceptions and biases are all around you and deeply rooted in our cultures. A little history lesson in legal Asian discrimination can shed some light on how we got to now. During the gold rush of the 1860s, a lot of Chinese laborers immigrated to the US to work as miners and rail workers, but citizens grew angry at the Yellow Peril, which sparked a series of laws against Asian immigration and Asians owning property. 1859. Oregon's constitution was revised so that no Chinaman could own property. 1879. California's constitution limited property ownership to aliens of white or African descent. 1882. The Chinese Exclusion Act prohibited all immigration of Chinese laborers. 1886. The Washington Territory's constitution bars property ownership by aliens ineligible for citizenship. 1890. San Francisco prohibits Chinese people from living and working in the city except in a designated location. 1892. A federal law is enacted requiring all Chinese residents to carry a permit or be deported. 1920. Another federal law revokes citizenship for any American woman who marries an alien. 1924. The Federal Immigration Act, known as the Johnson-Reed Act, puts quotas on immigration from specific countries. Asian immigration was completely banned. 1942 to 1945, over 100,000 Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps. Asian countries were apportioned immigration quotas after World War II, and the quotas weren't lifted until 1965. After 1965, Asian immigration started picking up, and over 50 years later, we number about 21 million, or about 6.5% of the US population, and we're now the fastest growing minority. But it's important to realize that the effects of 100 years of legal discrimination and exclusion runs very deep on both sides. Take my perspective as a second-gen millennial Asian American. I'm one of millions born in the US to parents who immigrated here in the 60s and the 70s. These first-gen immigrants took big risks coming here, leaving everything behind and often arriving with only a few bucks in their pocket. And that risk was especially big when the country had a history of being pretty hostile towards your race. The first gen had the mentality that America was a land of opportunity, and the chance of upward social mobility was much higher than where they came from. But there was still incredible amounts of racism built up over the last 100 years, culminating in the Vietnam War. So building a better lifestyle and wealth was achievable, but would most likely happen if you took the long game and played it safe. They worked hard and lay low, careful not to cause trouble so they could enable the next generation to rise higher. A lot of them didn't get higher education and opened takeout restaurants or dry cleaners. Rarely did you see Asians protest loudly against the system because they had chosen to come here and knew what the odds were. That's in contrast to African Americans, who faced 400 years of systemic and institutional racism after they were forcibly brought here. But this video isn't about measuring levels of racism and struggles. It's about acknowledging that for Asian Americans, it exists. My generation usually doesn't think about it much because it's ingrained in our heads to work hard, lay low in the face of adversity, and respect elders and authority figures. And this psychology is largely rooted in Eastern philosophies, like the Taoist ideal of following the path of least resistance. But my generation got what the previous one didn't, a middle-class lifestyle. So we were expected to use our time and energy to continue building upon what they started. And that meant studying and beefing up my extracurricular activities so I could get into a good school and secure a high-paying job and save my money. Because that was the lowest risk path to building generational wealth. And it's been largely effective. Almost all my Asian friends are software engineers, doctors, lawyers, and bankers. And it's not just my own sample bias. Look at the stats. Asian Americans have the highest education levels, median incomes, and median net worth of any minority group in America. And despite making up 6.5% of the population, we make up 12% of the professional workforce. That's why they call us the model minority. But if you dig into other stats, you'll unearth the hidden racism. According to one big tech company's report, Asian Americans are the least likely racial group to be promoted into Silicon Valley's management and executive levels, even though they are most likely to be hired into tech jobs. The same goes for big law, banking, and federal government jobs. It's actually much worse in real estate. Commercial real estate in the US is very much a white man's game. I mean, that's kind of expected when large chunks of the country barred property ownership for Asians. The largest real estate dynasties in the US were built over 2 or 3 generations, and they passed down their portfolios. At commercial real estate firms, Asian men make up about 4% of middle management, Asian women about 3%, And for senior level executives, Asian men about 1.6% and Asian women below 1%. YD development is currently 100% Asian, and my co-founder is an Asian American woman, so we're something of a statistical anomaly. But outside of YD, these stats illustrate the bamboo ceiling, and it's a problem that comes from two sides. The first side is that our country has a really ugly history of racism, and while we've made a lot of progress, it's still out there. I've experienced it firsthand many times all throughout my life. There was recently a baby step in the right direction with a successful lawsuit brought by the US Department of Labor against Google. It showed that women and Asian software engineers were hired at a lower rate and paid less than their white male counterparts. The second side of the problem is that my parents' generation's master plan of making us all nerds only got us so far. A lot of my generation has safe jobs, but most of us weren't raised to take huge risks and lead big companies. There's a distinct lack of leadership development in our culture. This became painfully evident in the unsuccessful lawsuit by Students for Fair Admissions against Harvard for discrimination in their admissions process. A number of Asian American applicants thought that this was the right occasion to speak out and instigate change. Some of these kids had a high GPA and test scores and plenty of extracurriculars and wondered why their peers with lower stats got in, but they didn't. I remember being really angry when I read about this. Not because they didn't get in, but this lawsuit was a really bad idea and would backfire in their faces. Harvard admissions officers revealed in court that their process looks at stats and personal traits, and that a lot of Asians rank really low on personality ratings. Ouch. Furthermore, it's telling of someone's personality when they need acceptance from an academic authority so badly that they'll sue to get it. For these Asians, it was so much a part of their cultural identity to be academically successful and be recognized for it, that they couldn't accept it when they didn't get that recognition. But it's just a label, and academic success doesn't necessarily lead to business success. And I see it firsthand when I interview students from programs that accept disproportionately way too many Chinese nationals. I'm talking like 40% of the class. I'm not going to point fingers at these programs, but they're pretty much degree mills. A lot of these students hope to get a job and stay in the US, but end up needing to go back because there's too many other applicants just like them. Don't think I'm just lashing out at my own kind here. I think my mentality is more like a new brand of Tiger Mom and Dad for the third gen of Asian Americans. There are times to speak out and lead change against systemic racism, but culturally, we kind of suck at it. I believe my generation is going to be focusing on raising much more well-rounded individuals with more diverse personalities and better leadership skills. It's no longer safe to just get good grades and standardized test scores, but that doesn't make it safe to get a niche liberal arts degree. And it's not like there aren't super successful Asian Americans out there. We just make a disproportionately small percentage of the super successful Americans out there. If you're an Asian American aspiring to break out of your cultural mold, look to the ones who've done it and made a name for themselves. Like me, of course. Hit those like and subscribe buttons already so I can become the most famous Asian American real estate developer on YouTube. Also, a ton of celebrities and business leaders have written their books sharing their experiences. That's right, W.O.M.B is back and I have an entire list for you. Check out Charles Yu's Interior Chinatown. This book was actually the inspiration of this video. Jane Hyun's The Bamboo Ceiling. She actually coined this term. Ali Wong's Dear Girls. Jimmy O. Yang's How to American. Aziz Ansari's Modern Romance. Eddie Huang's Fresh Off the Boat, a memoir. And Satya Nadella's Hit Refresh. If you read enough of these, I'm sure you'll find some patterns, just as you were molded to do. Stay curious, noobs.